Okay, hello everyone, back for live stream number 2. Let's get that camera nicely a bit better zoomed because it's not looking fantastic at the moment. And is that going to make it worse or is it going to make it better? Who knows? Oh, it's not making a blind bit of difference. Hello everyone. It'd be good to hear from you all to make sure that I am actually streaming. So please feel free to drop a message in chat and say hello. And yeah, we'll get started on the second ever live stream. It's Friday again, and I thought, why not, after the live stream went so well last week, do another one and keep the API love going. But this time, rather than focusing on Java with API testing, I thought we'd look at a popular tool, Postman. Now, there is quite a lot of Postman material out there. So, if you've already sort of come across Postman before, I'm basically going to go through the fundamentals of it. Depending on how much time we have, we'll maybe do a little bit of automation with it and stuff and maybe get something running headlessly. But really, I just kind of want to cover the basics and stuff. Hello, Danny. I thought you might join us. It's no pressure at all having someone from Postman watch you as you talk about their tooling. I felt I wanted to do this because at Ministry Testing, we get asked quite a lot about why we don't have any Postman courses on the dojo. And I think one of the challenges is because Postman is, it's a very popular tool. It's being actively developed on and stuff like that. So it's always a challenge building a course for a tool that's constantly changing. So investing time into that, can be a bit full on. But, it's a useful tool for testers, especially for those who are just getting into API testing and API checking, but who aren't necessarily comfortable on the coding side. And basically what I'm doing with each of these live streams is I'm actually going to be cutting it up. I'm going to be adding some activities and some intros and bits and pieces, and we're going to be putting these as courses on the dojo. And they're going to contribute towards an API testing pathway in the future. So yeah, we felt we needed some Postman stuff. I know Postman's very popular and it's Friday, so why not live stream about it? So what we're going to cover for this next hour? Well, first of all, I'm going to look at just some of the fundamental features of Postman. I'm going to talk a little bit just about each of the different main areas and get you up and running with just creating some requests. So more in a sort of context of manually creating API checks, API tests and sending them out and using them in different ways. But then once we've got a grasp of those sort of fundamental parts, we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at the automation side of things. So how we can actually get a bunch of API checks running against something and working that way. So let's get started. Where's my window gone? I've lost OBS. Where have you gone? Come back to me, OBS. Where are you? There you are. Lovely. Cool. Okay, so let's get into that screen share mode. And let's talk a little bit about context again before we get straight into Postman. So first of all, just like last week, we're going to be working against RESTful Booker again. So for those of you who didn't join the live stream last time, RESTful Booker is basically a free web API for you to use and practice API testing against. It's deliberately riddled with bugs, although some people have noticed there are some bugs, like in the API documentation, that actually need to be updated as well. But yeah, so it's just basically a fun, free little API to create API tests against, to discover bugs and just get you comfortable with the tooling. And it does reset itself every 10 minutes, and that's just so that it doesn't get overloaded with data, which has its challenges, but it is what it is. With something that's public, I think it's worthwhile just resetting it back to a base state. So we're going to use this as our API, and then we're going to use Postman as our tool to create our API, create our API requests. So first and foremost, if you have not downloaded the application before, you can find it at www.postman.com, and they have a big shiny orange button that says download the app, which you can click on, and then it'll know which operating system you are on. So I'm on Mac, so click on there and that'll give me the Mac version. If you're on Windows, get a Mac. So clicking on that downloads it. Then it's just a case of going through the sort of usual installation process and firing Postman up. I've got Postman up and running already. As you can see, there's lots of information already here. Let's close some of these things. We don't need all of this. Close all tabs and stuff. The first thing you're likely to see is to be asked to be logged in and to create an account. It's well worth creating an account. I think it used to be that it was an optional thing. It may actually be something that you have to do now. But creating an account's quite worthwhile, because then if you're using different machines, you can just log into your account and get all of your collections and all of your related API information that's important to you. And also it's used for some of the pro stuff. So there's a free version of this and there's a pro version of this. The free version gives you quite a lot of features, actually. They're very generous. But the pro has a lot around kind of working as teams. So you definitely need an account for that. So once you've either logged in or created an account or logged in, you'll be presented probably actually with a pop-up that offers you to do a bunch of stuff in Postman. Now, again, you can't see it on mine because I've turned it off as default, because I know what I want to use Postman for and stuff, and because I'm an older user of this, I'm sort of set in my ways in certain ways. But really, it's just like a handy pop-up to just get you started with all of the different things that you can do. Predominantly, we're going to look at just the API requests and that sort of stuff. We're not going to look so much at the mocks or the API documentation or the monitoring stuff. I have actually done a live stream on Postman before in the past for AIT Online, and we did explore those features a little bit. So if you want to check those sort of features out and we're looking for those sort of features, then I'd recommend just checking out the Automation in Testing YouTube channel, and all the details are there. So pop up once we've closed that. This is kind of the view that we're going to see. Now you can see that I've got information here from projects and things that I've worked on, but I want to talk just very briefly about some of the sort of the main areas of Postman that I tend to use when working with API requests. So the first thing you're going to see is down here is that there's two sections in here. So there's a browse view and there's a build view. Now, we're predominantly going to work in this build view. So if for any reason I've just been talking about pop-ups and stuff and saying you're going to see this view and you're like, hang on, actually I see this view with all these different details here, and I don't see what you're seeing, then just come down to the bottom right hand corner, click build, and then this gets you into the sort of the build section of it. So Danny's telling me it is still optional to sign up, but it is worth it for all the extra features, and I would agree with him on that as well. So in the build view, this is, in my mind, it's like what I see is like the classic view. This is how originally, like I remember Postman when it first started. This is sort of how I see it, and it's kind of the view that I'm most comfortable with. But a lot of the things that we can do here, you can actually do in the browse view, I believe. So yeah, let's talk about the brief sections, the important sections that matter to us. So first of all, we have the history section. So as you can see in here, I've got quite a lot of different requests organised by date, and that's because I do use Postman quite a lot for testing things out, and Postman gets mentioned quite a lot in a lot of the training that I do, so I end up using it quite a lot just to demonstrate some of the features and doing live streams like this. But the history tab is really useful because anything that you actually create and you send, you will actually see in the left hand side here. So if you haven't saved those requests at a later date for a later date or for later usage, you can still see them on the left hand panel here, that's really handy. And one thing I've recently discovered, and I don't know how recent it is actually, but having save responses as a toggle means that once you've had this checked, so by default, when it's unchecked, when you send a request, it will save the request details, but it won't save the response, which can be a bit frustrating sometimes because you might be in a situation where you've sent a request and you've got some context-specific information back, which you won't be able to retrieve at a later date if you've got it in here. So sometimes it is worthwhile enabling the save responses toggle so that you actually get the responses back, because it may be just some of that, it's that information that you're interested in, it's not the request per se that you want. So yeah, the history tab basically just shows the history of the requests that you've created. You can see some interesting things here with like the type of requests we've done, so you can see the methods and you can see the URIs as well to quickly show me what it was that what I was sending as a request. So that's the history tab, and that's one of the first places we're going to look at. Then we're going to jump straight over into this main area here, and we're going to click the plus tab, and this is going to create our first request. So at the moment it's empty, there's nothing else to put in there, but this is where we're going to do the main guts of the work today, where we're going to actually create things. We're going to add our automation in at a later date as well. So yeah, you can either click the plus tab up here, you can also click the new button up here, and this is that pop-up that I was talking about that you normally see. So you can also click request, and it gives you a bit more detail to create your request. So it's basically asking you to save it before you show it in here, whereas the plus tab just opens a bunch of unsaved requests to use. But either way, you end up in the same result. You end up with the request editor in front of you. I imagine Postman have some specific domain names for these things, but I've never learnt them. There we go. And this is where we fill in our details. So we have the name of our request. So if I was to save this, I could give it a name, and we'd see the name up here. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Then we have our drop down here for our HTTP methods. So we see the sort of popular ones: get, put, post, patch, delete. A bunch of other ones that don't necessarily get mentioned as much because they're not used as much, but still useful to have. Then we can enter our URI or our URL. And this is our HTTP, whatever it is that we're going to explore. Then we have a bunch of different additional things that we can do or add to our request as well. So I'm not going to go into all of these in massive detail just now because we will explore these as we go through. But very quickly, params is basically they're the query string that you put at the end. So when you see a query string at the end, you see something like question mark, check-in equals something, and checkout equals something else. This is just a quick way to add that to the URI. And you notice as I filled that in, it actually filled these sections in here as well. So that's quite handy. Authorization. There's lots of ways in which we can authorize and authenticate our requests, and Postman helps with a bunch of them out of the box. The one that I tend to sort of use in examples the most is basic authentication. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But a lot of people have to work with things like OAuth. So basically, this has all been created as a quick way to do this easily, so that you don't have to identify all the requests up front for things like OAuth, because OAuth has a complicated chain. Well, not necessarily complicated, but it has a chain of requests that you have to make before you can send your initial HTTP request. So the authorization tab really helps with a lot of that sort of stuff. But we'll get there back to no auth. Headers is where you add your HTTP headers. We'll look at that more. Body is where you send your body, like your payload that you want to send. And there's lots of different types of payloads we can send. There's the ones that tend to be sort of predominantly used are raw. So raw allows you to send JSON, XML, other types of raw text to allow the API to process that. XWW form URL encoded, which kind of looks like a query string. So rather than sending a raw object, you send a string, and it's made up of like key value pairs in the sort of same ways you'll see in that query string example I did. Form data, that tends to be used, I believe, like when you're uploading things. So like if you want to upload images and things like that. But then there's also this binary option here as well. So I believe this actually probably is actually more in the uploading files space. So if you're trying to simulate HTTP requests where you're uploading information, you would do it there. And then GraphQL is quite a new approach to APIs. So it's still using HTTP, but it's that's a bit distracting. I'm late for a meeting apparently. But GraphQL is a new thing where it's a new way of kind of structuring the request posts that you make, and the it's basically how you send the bodies and how you get the responses back, slightly different to how we do it with raw. We're not going to look at GraphQL at the moment, but who knows? Maybe that could be a future live stream. It's something I want to learn more about myself. And then finally down here we have the response section, which is going to give us the details about the response. And we'll look into that once we send some requests. And then the final bit I want to just mention is the collections tab here. So the collections tab starts off initially as just an easy way to organize your requests. So when you want to save some requests, you create a collection. It's basically a folder. So I just click new collection here and my new collection, and I can add some other bits and pieces in there, but it creates a folder, and then I can add requests in there. And initially, yeah, it's just a handy way to organize your requests that you've created. But later on, we'll maybe find out, if we get into the automation side of things, is that it's actually a really easy way to start automating, because we can actually just run all our requests within our collection folder. Okay, so those are sort of the three main areas that we're going to look at today and have a play with. Actually, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the runner up here. And this is the thing that's responsible for running our requests in a collection, but we'll come back to that later. And then import is quite a handy little space as well. Especially around like copying in Swagger documentation or raw HTTP requests or curl requests. So for example, like just to sort of demonstrate this, I could take a curl request from an API document. So here we have one for, let's say, get booking IDs. So down here, well, here is our curl request. Very, very simple. I can copy that. I can drop that, paste raw text, click import, and it creates an HTTP request for me to use. Okay, so those are the main areas to look at. But let's start looking at creating our first request. And given the fact that we've just imported that curl request, it's a good place to maybe start with a GET request. So we're going to start with a GET request that just pulls down all the booking IDs. So first thing we've done here is we've set our HTTP method. GET is default, but I just want to highlight the fact that that's been selected. If we want to create other requests later on, we're going to have to open this up and select them. And then we're going to put our URI in here as well, or our URL, depending on sort of your wording and how you look at it. But in here we've got oh, excuse me. In here, so we've got our protocol, so HTTPS. We have our host, restfulbooker.herokuapp.com, and then we've got our path /booking. So really, that's all we need at the moment, because there's just not much else that's required for this GET request. You'll see here as well that there's a bunch of different hidden headers that are being added in here. And these are basically auto-generated by Postman. But we are going to start looking at adding in some headers in a minute. But for now, GET request, URI, let's click send. Excellent. So now we can see the response area has been filled in. And we can start seeing details of we've sent the HTTP request, now we're getting details of the HTTP response. So first of all, we have the body itself. So we can see it's sent a JSON object back with a bunch of booking IDs in there, and it's nicely formatted it for us. And excuse me, Postman knows that it's JSON, so it's actually selected JSON in this object in this drop down here. This is quite handy for just for formatting purposes, and also it would tell you if maybe there were some errors or something like that. So that's the pretty view. We've got the raw. So this is actually what was sent back, but this is it sort of stylized to make it easier. Preview. I think preview is more useful if you're actually getting some HTML back. So if you wanted to render the HTML, because at the moment it's just showing us the same code again. And then visualize. I can't use this because it's just some raw response data. And then we've also got some details here. So we've got cookies. No cookies are being set. No cookie headers have been sent back in this response, so we don't need to worry about that. We did receive a bunch of other headers. So content type's probably the most interesting one here, which I imagine Postman read, and that's how it worked out that the body was JSON. But there's a bunch of other stuff that's coming back from from our API. I mean, I have no idea why it says server cowboy, but that's very cool. And then we'll look at test results a little bit later. And then finally, up here, we have some more details. So we have a status code. So a status code is always very important when it comes to understanding what the status of the machine was. So we don't always get a body back, but we need to understand how the API behaved. So we read that from the status code. If we made an error in our request, we get a 400. If the service is broken, we get 500. That sort of stuff. So it's always worth keeping an eye on that. And then a few extra details around how long it took to send the request and get the response. And we get like different details around SSL handshakes and how long it took to download things and stuff like that. And then how big the response is. You can also see how big the request is as well, which is quite handy for like performance metric stuff. So that's it really, like that's our first request. It's just a case of we set a GET, we put a URI in, we click send, and we get some information back. And as I said before, if we look in the histories tab, we come up here, today we can see these requests being sent as well. So let's talk a little bit about the header tab, because this is where we can add additional HTTP headers. And as I've talked about in previous courses, a lot of behavior actually exists in the HTTP headers that tends to get sort of forgotten about. So in the last live stream, if you saw it, you might have seen that I actually created an API check in which we managed to get a status code of 418. And that was because we set an accept header with the wrong details. So as standard, like the hidden is sending an accept of star.star. So it's kind of like wildcard. I don't care. Just send, like, I'll accept anything. Just send me something back in some sort of form. But if we were to override this and do something like application/og and click send, that worked. I don't know why that worked. I kind of expected that to send a 418 back. Could it be content type? Or was it? No, apologies. That's because it's not on this endpoint, that bug. We have to do booking/1. And if we click send now, yes, we get 418. I'm a teapot. And a handy little bit of text from the API to say I'm a teapot as well. Yeah, so this is a bug I deliberately encoded into the API. But if we were to remove this accept header, so we're no longer kind of setting this value ourselves, and Postman's going to take control and do star-star, star/star. So it's just kind of generic. We click send now. We get our response back. So that's how we can sort of configure GET requests even further. We can, additionally, from setting a method and a URL, we can actually add in headers. Then we can also add query strings as well. So query strings, the way that they tend to work is that they will apply additional behavior to something that you've requested. So /booking returns us all the booking IDs. But what if I wanted to just get specific booking IDs within a certain date range? So I can add a query string that says something like check-in equals, let's say we want to get this first result back. So we'll do check-in equals the first, and checkout equals this. And just so we can be sure, we're definitely gonna increase the days, increase the range. We'll do that. Okay, so we've gone back to the booking endpoint. We're not doing /1 anymore. But you saw that I added that because I'm quite comfortable working in HTTP. I find it perfectly fine to start adding query strings in here, or as Postman calls them, query parameters. But I could easily just drop them in here as well. And the benefit is I could put some description in here. So the earliest a user checks in, for example, and then we could put another one, the latest a user checks out. So it's quite handy in terms of just sort of adding more feedback, adding more intent into the things you're creating. So if we click send now, we only get 3 booking IDs back. And that's because the query string that's been added is saying, return me, like I want booking IDs. That's the stuff that I want, but I only want specific booking IDs. So here's a range in which I want you to sort of appear in here. And just to sort of demonstrate that, if we uncheck these and see how it removes it from there, we click send, it returns me all the booking IDs. And it's nice to see other people playing around with it. Up to 29 bookings. So that's cool. That's going to make this more interesting as people start deleting things. Okay, so that's our first request. That's like a GET request, looking with parameters, query strings, and working with headers. Let's now start looking at creating some data. So with creating some data, not a data, we're going to change our method to post. I'm going to be a little bit lazy and I'm just going to copy this in here. So we're posting to /booking this time, not creating stuff. And we need to provide a body. We need to provide something to create. So what we're going to do is we're going to send a JSON payload. And to do that, we need to enable raw. I'm going to select JSON here just so I can, basically it helps me with the formatting in here. And again, just for the sake of brevity, let's copy and paste this in. So this is This is basically the request. This is the body I'm going to send. This is the booking that I want to create. So let's just call it Mark's live stream. Just so we've got something, or liver stream, that'd be weird. Okay. So in here, I've created a basic JSON object to send over to the API to store that booking. One of the reasons why I selected JSON here is because it quite helpfully will tell me if I've got errors in my JSON object. So say, for example, I'd missed a colon out. I get a nice little cross there, and it's saying I'm expecting a colon instead of a bracket. Or the typical one you find is that you forget to add a comma at the end. And it's like expecting a comma rather than a double quote. So I can put that back in as well. So it's quite a nice visual way of working out whether or not you're sending the correct information. And then finally, another thing that it does as well is by selecting JSON, it actually adds in a content. Oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, no, it's done it in the hidden section. Apologise. So what it's done is it's injected into the hidden auto-generated headers a new one, a content type application JSON. So if I was to change this to XML, and we go back to the headers, we can see that it's changed it to content type application XML. Let's go back, change that to JSON as well. So what it's doing is it's giving you a quick shortcut there. So rather than me having to go to the headers and add in content type application JSON, it does it for me, because we need to provide a content type header when we post information. But just so we're like very clear that this is a thing that we want to add, I'm going to put it in here myself. Nice one. And then we're going to do an accept as well, just so, again, just making it clear that these things matter to us in terms of the request we're sending. Because it may be that I look at these later and start thinking of test ideas to change the values. Okay, so let's click send on that. Hey presto, we have a booking. We've received a booking ID back. We got a 200, so it's been okay, it's been created. And it's also shared the booking that's been created, Mark's live stream, booking ID number 19. So there we go, that's how we create some data. We could do this in different ways. So for example, we could do this with XML. And I'm going to just pinch an XML body from an old request. So let's take that. So instead of JSON, we might want to put XML in. Let's remove that because that's an old thing. But this time, because I've put XML, we've got a little icon here. What's this doing? So it's saying the language selection is different from the language inferred from the content type header. That's very useful as well. So we can go back to our header and go, okay, we've obviously, it's saying application JSON, but actually we want to send application XML now. And then I'll change this to text XML to have an XML response back. So let's click send. Oh, something went wrong. I broke something. I don't know what though. Could it be that I've sent that wrong? Let's actually just uncheck that. Nope, still an internal server error. First name, last name, deposit paid. Okay, so it turns out XML is broken. So let's let's ignore that for now. But it's the same principles as like we're working with JSON as well. If we were to do this in an XW form URL encoded approach, what we would do is actually we'd do key value pairs differently. So in here I'd type in the key, which is first name, and then I put a value mark. And then we'd go through each of the things that we want to create. So Winteringham, deposit paid, true, total price is 200, etc., etc. And actually, like, just as a quick thing to demonstrate basically what this, when you click send, this will translate into in our HTTP request, this. So it's sent it as like an encoded string. So you can see like key value pairs separated with ampersands as well. So if you're working with an API that doesn't take JSON, doesn't take XML, but actually takes form URL encoded stuff, then you have to do it that way. And we can't look at uploaded stuff because this API doesn't do uploads. But those are sort of the common ways in which we would create some data. So let's see if we can bring this back. Yeah. Turn that back into JavaScript. Turn that to JSON. And make that application/JSON again. Click send. Yep. So that's creating something. So to summarize, post, we put our URL in there. Body, selecting raw for this case, but if you're working with other types of requests, you add in, you select that radio button for whatever you want to do. For us, we're dropping the JSON in there, add our headers in here. Still getting an error message. Oh, it's because I selected JavaScript rather than JSON. There we go. Yep, so put our body in, set our headers, click send, and away we go. So that's creating some data. Finally, well, not finally, like now that we've created a couple of requests, we might now want to start thinking about saving these because we're starting to build a collection of HTTP requests that we might want to use again later on, maybe to create some test data, maybe to help you with some testing. So to do this, as we said before, we create a new collection, type a name in there, give it a description. We can actually set some sort of kind of, I'd say global, but like collection-based settings. So say all of our HTTP requests in this collection uses this type of authorization. We have pre-requests and test tabs. We're not going to look at those just yet, but these are like things that we could get it to do before and after a request has been run. And then we can actually set some sort of collection specific variables. We're going to look at environmental variables in a little bit, hopefully. But basically this is used for setting context specific variables. So if I had like a host and this collection was working with a specific environment like live or local or test environment, I could put like test environment related variables in here. But for now, we just want to store some stuff in there. So I've created a collection, I've called it my new collection. It's empty at the moment, so let's save and add these requests in here. So up here, I'm going to click save. And we'll call this one get booking IDs. Let's see. And click save. Oh, no, let's not click save just yet because we want to select the collection that we want to add in so we can just quickly search for it. So there. So that's me selecting the collection and giving it a request name, save to my new collection. And then we'll do the same again. So save. This one is like create bookings. And it's actually remembered from the last time that this is the collection I'm currently wanting to create stuff in or save stuff in. So click save to my new collection here. And away we go. Let's edit that so that it actually is bookings rather than bookings. Update that. Cool. So now we've saved a couple of collections. A couple of requests in a collection. And it means that if I close these down now, I can retrieve my requests from just opening the collection, selecting them, and it opens them up again as well. If we hadn't actually used these as, if we hadn't added these into collections, of course, we could always just go back to the history section and then I could click here. And again, as you can see, it sort of fills in all of the details of the last request I sent. I could get an older one so that they get booking. And just by selecting on them, they retrieve the information from the history and put it back into this tab as well. So lots of different ways to retrieve old requests and stuff. So even if you close them down and you've maybe forgotten to save it after you've tested it out a few times, you can still grab it from the history section. Okay, how are we looking at time? Right, let's talk a little bit about the automation side of things. So first of all, we should probably talk about the tests tab. So as I said before, we now have this collection. Well, actually, before we talk about the test tab, let's talk about the runner itself, because we've created a collection with a bunch of requests in there, and we can actually just run those. So, for example, if you're in a situation where you just want to create some data, so you're not necessarily doing any checking, but you're just like, oh, I need 100 users or something like that, or I need certain records set up in a certain way, we can actually just run the collection as is. So we do that by clicking on the runner, and then we find our collection. So I'm going to search for here, my new collection. And by selecting it, it shows me the requests that's saved in there, and I can set the run order. So I could actually turn these around and do them in different orders. I could uncheck them and check them to say which ones that I do want to run. There's a bunch of stuff down here. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's the main stuff. Is I select my collection, make sure that I've got some checked here, and I put them in an order. Click run my new collection, and there we go. I've just run a bunch of requests super quick in an automated fashion. And at the moment, they're all showing green, and they're showing green because I'm not doing any checks. I'm not checking for anything. I'm not checking for response codes or data or anything like that, or actually doing any behavior before or after. So they're just going to be green. And it obviously tells me that because it says the request does not have any tests. One thing that's worth highlighting about this view, that's really useful, that people I think miss out sometimes, is if you hover over the name of the request that you've created and click on it, you can actually see quite a lot of detail about the request you sent. So the URL, its headers, if there was a body, and you can also see details about the response as well. So this one, there were no headers logged, no body response body logged. But if we actually looked at create bookings, we could see no response body was blocked. Maybe we need to set something to say log the response body. But it's still quite handy in terms of seeing what it is that you've actually sent. Because when we start working with things like variables later on, it's a good way to track whether or not you've sent the right variables at the right time. Okay, so that's very, very briefly the runner. And like I say, as a minimum, you can use it that way. So you could just create a bunch of requests and then just run them to create some data. But we might actually want to start doing some API checking. We might want to actually start seeing like whether or not we're getting correct values being stored or if we're getting correct status codes. And we do that by going to the tests tab. So let's start with our get request here. And let's start with a very, very easy test that just says make sure that we get status code of 200. Now, this test tab, well, basically the whole of Postman is, I believe it's using a tool called Electron. And Electron is written in JavaScript. Oh, so Danny says I need to check the box before running to get the response data. So let's have a quick look at that. So save responses. Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Thank you, Danny. But so if we click save responses, and then we go my new example, run my collection, go here, boom. Yeah, we see our response headers and response body as well. Nice one. Okay, cool. So that's how you actually save the responses into your results as well, if you need those. Anyway, let's back to the tests tab. So so this application is written in, I believe it's written in Electron, and Electron is using JavaScript, which is the best. And don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise, JavaScript rules. But because of that, we can actually use JavaScript for well, we just use JavaScript in Postman, and that's how the tests tab works. We basically add in JavaScript that can be executed after a request has been done. So a bunch of libraries have been added around checking that have been added into Postman that we can take advantage of. Now, for some of you, you might be like looking at that and going, I don't know JavaScript. I have no inclination of learning JavaScript, to be honest, and I'm a bit terrified by it. Fortunately, there is a snippets tab on the right-hand side, which is immensely useful, even if you do know JavaScript, because you might be quite lazy like me, and you don't want to necessarily type out everything. So as I said before, I want to do a test or a check to say status code is 200. And fortunately, there's already a snippet there, so I can just click on that, and that injects my code for me. So if you're not very comfortable with JavaScript, and just want to get some stuff in there, just click on that. That injects the information in there, and you've got that to use. You just need to modify it. So say, for example, I was checking for a status code 404. First of all, I would change this so it's clear. So this is the name of the check or the test I'm doing. And then I would obviously change the value here. So let's talk very quickly about these three lines. So PM is Postman, so it's kind of referring to the Postman application and all the libraries and stuff that it has inside it. So one of the things it has is a test library. So we call pm.test. We give it a name, give our test a name, and we should always give our tests or checks a good name. They need to have clear intent. So if other people end up reading them, they know what it is. And then because it's JavaScript, we have a function that will be triggered as part of this test. And inside there, that's where we have our test code, like what we're actually going to check. So for this instance, we're going to have Postman. So Postman is, the global, the whole thing. Dot response. So get me the response from this request, or from this cycle. To and have tend to be, like in the JavaScript world, tend to be sort of empty functions, but they're just helping us to make things more readable even. And then we call status. So we're saying the status code must be 200. So with this function that we're calling here, status, we provide the code 200 or an integer 200. And that's it. That's how to add a test in. So I'm going to click save just to make sure that that's saved for later. Except I've done this in a unsaved version. So let's open up our get booking IDs. Let's close that down because that's from the histories tab, isn't it? Let's go back here, go into tests, we'll copy this back in. I'm going to save this. So that's updated. Remember to save. Postman doesn't auto-save, or at least it doesn't auto-save as default. Hint, hint, feature request, hint, hint. So sometimes you do end up in situations where you're running things and it doesn't work properly because you haven't saved it. So save often. So we've saved our JavaScript code in here into our tests tab. We can actually just test the check out just by clicking send. So by clicking send, down here in our response body now, we can see that it says test results 1 of 1. And it showed us our test has passed. So for fairly simple stuff, you can just drop some tests into this tab, and then you can just click send and just get some feedback on that way. And just to demonstrate that in a different way, let's say change the status code to 400, and if we click send now, it says it's failed, and you get an error, and it's then expecting the response to be 400 but got 200. So let's update that again. Now what this means is if we go back to the runner and run the collection again, we're going to see this run as part of the whole process. So let's go back to the runner, but we're going to go back in a different way this time. This time we're going to hover over the collection, we're going to click the tab here, get some details about the collection, and we're going to click run. So this opens the runner in, but specifically for this workspace, which is very handy. Okay, so now let's click run. And we can see here we've got this test here. The status code is 200, and we've got a green dot because it's passed. And if it was to fail, which let's try that. So again, let's turn this to 400, save, go back to our collection runner, run it again. And this time we see, it's very abundantly clear that it's failed. And we can actually filter on things that have failed, things that have passed. Obviously, we can't filter anything like that request isn't coming up because nothing passed because it doesn't have any tests in it. But yeah, we can clearly see when something's failed. So this is how we start adding in checks that we want to add. And there's all sorts of different things we can do, and there's all sorts of snippets that are really useful for getting things correct. So we could do one. So let's go back to our post request, for example. And we know we're sending like a last name. We're sending a request, and the last name is going to be booking. The last name for the booking is going to be livestream. So let's do a test to make sure that that value is actually saved. So we can, again, cheat. We could do a JSON value check, add it in here. This time need to update our test name to be something sensible. So check that correct last name is stored. And then basically what this is doing is this is assigning the JSON from the response, HTTP response, into a variable JSON data. And it's actually saving it as a JavaScript object. So I can do JSON data dot booking, which would return me this sub-object. And then I do dot last name. And then I would say that I want it to equal livestream. And we click send, just practice, test results pass, perfect. Click save, back to our runner one more time. And then we can run the collection, and we got 2 tests passing. Cool, nice and easy. So that's how you add in tests. That's how you start to turn your collection into a suite of automated API checks. We've added in our HTTP requests, then we fill in the tests tab. Very briefly, I'm going to talk about the pre-request script here as well. It basically works the same as the tests tab, but it runs before a request is triggered. So imagine the order is pre-request, send the HTTP request, get the response, run tests. And that can be quite useful if you want to generate some random data, or if you need to check some values and stuff before you actually send off your request, that sort of thing. It basically just gives you a bit more control. But again, it's still using JavaScript, so you can add JavaScript into here and it'll execute that for you. Okay, so that's the tests tab. Let's talk a little bit about variables. Let's start with environmental variables. So for example, let's say I wanted to run these tests both locally and live. So live is on RESTful Booker and locally is on localhost. At the moment, what I have to do is I have to keep going through and I have to keep changing these values. And, if I've got more than probably 5 requests, it's going to get really frustrating really quickly. So this is where we can use environmental variables and just generally use variables at large within our requests. So to do this, first of all, we have to create some environments. We do that up here in the top right-hand corner by clicking the cog button. So with the cog button, this opens up our sort of manage environments area. And you can see I've already created 2 from a previous session. So one's called live, one's called local. But if I wanted to add a new one in, I just click add, give it a name and start adding in my values. So let's open one of these to just take a look. So live. Yeah. Anyway, so this is live, and I've added in a variable called host. And I've added two aspects into this, like two values. I've got initial value and current value. So initial value is basically your default value, whereas the current value is whatever it is currently as you progress through your workflow. And what I mean by that is that you can actually programmatically, so in that pre-requests tab and in that tests tab, you can actually change environmental variables as they go. And we're definitely going to look at that in a minute. But for now, because we're hard coding this, really all I need to set is the initial value, because the current value is never going to change, because none of the requests actually update this host variable. But yeah, so I've created host, I've given it the value of RESTful Booker, and I've also created another one called local, and I've done exactly the same thing, giving it a variable called host, but this time I've changed its value to localhost. So it's the same variable but different value. And what this means is that I can close all of this down, and I can actually remove this section here, and I can put a variable in. I can put that host variable in. And I do that by starting with opening two curly brackets, enter host, close with two curly brackets or mustache brackets or whatever you want to call them. And you'll notice it's gone orange, and that's because Postman has recognized this as a variable, and it's got like a little E next to it because it knows it's an environmental variable. And you can see the details of it. So its initial value and its current value. So let's do this and go here and do the same here. So now the host is variabilized. Don't forget to save. So now when we run these, so let's click send on this one. It's creating it's getting a booking because it's looking at the RESTful Booker environment. But if I was to switch this from live to local, and then I click send, I get an error. And I get an error because I don't have anything running locally. But you'll notice I've not changed anything to the request, I just changed the variables. So this becomes really useful, if you're working with multiple different environments, or if you have different states that you need to work with, say like for example you have complex data sets that you need to work with in different ways. Creating lots of different environments works really nicely that way. And of course we can use these in the runner as well. So if we go back to the runner again, we can select our collection. And now we need to select an environment here. So if I select local, for example, let's make them fail, and click run now, it all fails. It just basically falls over because there's no API running. But if I go back to the collection runner and we go live this time, and we do run my new collection, boom, we get two requests like that. So that's how you create two requests. That's how you variabilize some of your stuff in an environmental context. But I want to talk about one last thing before we have to finish up, because unfortunately we're sort of reaching the hour's end, and that's about sharing variables across requests, because a lot of the time we want to share information from one thing to another. So for example, we might have, not as an example, basically in the RESTful Booker API, we can delete bookings, but to delete them, we have to be logged in. So I'm going to cheat here a real quick bit, and I'm going to click on this to open up an old delete request and a post here. Right. So with these two requests, if I click delete right now and just click delete right now, I get a 403. And I get a 403 is because I'm not authorized to delete the request. And that's because the token I've provided in my cookie is incorrect. It's an old token, doesn't exist anymore. So I have to create a new token. So if I go to this request and I post my username and password, click send, I get a token back. And then I can copy that into here, use this, and it deletes the booking. Now this is a bit of a headache because this means that I've got to constantly manually update the token every time I'm working with this. So if I run this like 3 weeks later, it's going to fail because that token's broken. So let's look at how we can actually extract that token, add it to our environmental variables, and then use it in this delete request like this. So to do this, first of all, we need to save these. Let's save these as authorize and delete. So we've got these later on for usage. Okay, so we've got authorize and delete down here. We need to create a new environmental variable. So let's just do it in live for now, but you would likely create it in both if you were going to use both sets. Call it token. I'll give it an initial value of ABC123. I don't really care about that. And what we're going to do is in the tests tab, we're not going to run a test this time. We're actually just going to extract a token. So again, I'm going to cheat a little bit here and I'm going to use the Json value check snippet. And then I'm going to take the set an environmental variable section here. So we know that we've set our variable as token, but we need to send it a value. So I'm going to extract these lines of code from here because I'm not doing a test, so I'm not really worried about that. And I'm not testing it either. I just need to extract the token from JSON data. So I do JSON data dot token. So now if we click send, just to test this out, it's all working fine. Now if we look up here, so we can quickly do an environmental quick look, we can see the token has changed. So we can also save variables on a global level as well. And this is stuff from an old request, but we're looking at the token here. We've seen that it's changed. So that 5C7C blah, blah, blah matches that token there. This one's an old one. So from that, I've actually now updated the environmental variables programmatically by using JavaScript. So we can click save on that. And then we can change this. So again, like we did with the host, we can do colons here. We can click host. And again, treats it like a variable, environmental variable. Click save. And I can actually click send now. Ooh, and it's giving me an error. That may be because it's pinching it from the global. So let's clear out our globals. Uncheck those, save. Try that again. Oh, no, it's not worked. Why has it not worked? Well, let's see this running actually in the main request. In the collection run, and see if it behaves there. So let's uncheck these two because we don't want to run them. Let's run these. And it's not worked. And it's because it's not sent. Oh, what? Oh, have I been a numpty? I think I've been a numpty, haven't I? Yes, I put a host in. That was foolish. I imagine people are screaming at me now at the moment going, what are you doing, Mark? It's host. All right, let's change that, update that again. So now we're actually extracting the token environmental variable and not the host one. So it's that sort of stuff you have to keep an eye out, making sure that you use the right variables. So let's click run my new collection now. Still not working. Why is it not working? Let's try again with save responses. So this is where you end up in these situations where you start debugging things. It can be quite useful. So run my new collection, authorize response body. It's giving me that token. And it's used use the correct token. I wonder why that's not working. Why is that not working? But if we do that, that's funny. Oh, it's because I've got an old test in there. Oh, silly mark. Silly mark. Let's ignore that. So let's revert this back to tokens, save all this, one last run and see how it works. And hopefully this should be fine. Live, my new collection. Uncheck those two. Run my new collection. There we go. Greens. Greens across the board. Hooray, it worked. So that's how we can actually share information from one request to another. We can store it in our environmental variables and then use them later on. We can also store them globally as well, but globally does mean that that's accessible across all environments. So it doesn't matter if you were live or local, it would be used across all of them, which has its uses. But it's good practice if it's something specific to that environment is to keep it in those variables. Cool. So unfortunately, that's it for now. I'm afraid I have to wrap up. I was kind of hoping I could show you a bit about data-driven API checking and running this headlessly, but what I will do is I will record those maybe locally by myself, and then I will add them to the resulting dojo course that's going to come out of this, which will hopefully be of use for you. Again, thank you for coming along and joining in, and for your help, Danny. That's always helpful when it comes to Postman stuff. Just things to mention. First of all, Ministry of Testing has a new conference that just went live yesterday. We just launched Test Bash Home, which is going to be on at the end of April. So unfortunately, we had to cancel quite a few of our events recently, but we're back, and we're back even better with an online conference. And just to really sort of up the ante, it's going to be 24 hours long, and it's going to be jam-packed with talks. We're going to go back over old talks and interview the people who gave those talks and ask them, what views have changed, what haven't. We've got activities that we're going to get you all involved in. I've got a lot of coding to do before that. We've got live coaching events going on. There'll be 99-second talks, as there always will be. Sponsors, each of the Mott staff will be doing a little bit to say hello and kind of opening ourselves up a bit more to the community as well. So it's going to be awesome. So and it's super cheap as well, £49 for a ticket. And if you can't make all of it and only can make some of it, because 24 hours is a lot of time, all of it's going to be on the dojo afterwards, and it will be available for you to access later on, so you can come back to it at a later date. So do check out the Ministry of Testing site, ministryoftesting.com, and get involved. Come join the conference. There's people from all around the world it's going to be at this conference. It's going to be amazing. Secondly, I'm going to keep doing these live streams. I'm enjoying them, and I'm getting some positive feedback from them, and I'm creating some good content out of it. So please do, if you like this, please do tell other people about it. Subscribe, click on the bell. YouTube is our predominant way of sharing this, but we're obviously also on Periscope on Twitter as well, so you can check it out there. I do want to get more people involved. I can do an hour on a Friday, but if you would like to do anything around testing, if you'd like to talk about a subject, if you'd like to demonstrate a tool, if you'd like to get a couple of people together for a live stream and have a conversation about a topic, then please do get together. So get in touch with me if you're interested in doing a live stream, and maybe Friday afternoons can be like a little bit of Mott TV, and we'll all do a live stream each, and basically just keep connected, keep sharing in these lockdown times. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you for coming along, and I'll see you next week. I have no idea what I'm going to do next week, so if you do have any suggestions, please let me know. But other than that, I'll speak to you soon. Catch you later. Bye, everyone.